click record now. So as you know, hopefully this has been Experiential Learning Week 2021, our first time that we've had this week before, and we've had a great slate of programs. If you didn't have a chance to attend, we would encourage you to go to the website where you'll be able to find some of those recordings and still be able to engage with a lot of the great work that happened this week. So we would highly encourage you to check that out, and you can see the website there on the screen. My name is Lisa McElfresh, and I serve as a career advisor and co-op manager in our career services office. And I'm excited today to share with you how you can list all this great experiential learning that you've been doing while you've been at NKU on your resume. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. If you have questions as we go through the presentation, feel free to unmute yourself and ask those questions or to put them in the chat. I've got Hannah here with me, and Hannah is going to help monitor the chat. Hannah works as a student assistant in our office. And so she's a peer career coach and helps people with their LinkedIn profile and getting ready for their job search. So if you'd like to schedule an appointment, please reach out to our office and we'd be happy to set you up with someone that you can talk with. So as we get started, I'm curious, what is a resume? So when we talk about putting this on your resume, what are we talking about? And again, you can either unmute and answer or put it in the chat if that's easier for you. So when we talk about a resume, we're talking about a summary of your background, your skills, your competencies, your accomplishments, right? It's kind of a showcase of all of the skills and experiences that you have had that you're going to be sending to employers. What's the goal of your resume? Oftentimes when I ask this question, the answer that I get is the goal of the resume is to get a job. And while certainly that's a part of it, the goal of the resume is to get your foot in the door for an interview. And so that's really why we create the resume, is to showcase those skills so that they select us for the interview, so that then we can go and meet with them and talk with them face to face or video screen to video screen about the position that they have available. So for purpose of example, let's imagine that we were together today for this presentation and that we were sitting in one of the beautiful rooms on campus and we were chatting, maybe UC 135, and we're chatting about resumes, and I wanted to impress you, right? I wanted you to think career services was great. I wanted you to know that Lisa is great. And so I wanted to impress you. And so I decided to bake cupcakes for all of you, homemade cupcakes. Now, none of that store-bought and stuff. I was going to make everything from scratch. And so last night, as I was preparing our cupcakes, I mixed up all my ingredients. As I was baking my cupcakes, I was making that homemade buttercream frosting. I can just taste it now. And so as I'm working on my cupcakes and I'm making my cupcakes for our group together, I run out of time and I get about half of them iced, and I don't have time to finish the rest of them with my piping bag where I was piping the beautiful ice cream swirl on the top of my cupcakes. And so I get out my butter knife because it's getting late. And if I don't get my beauty rest, you certainly don't want to know me. And so I get my knife out and I butter knife ice the rest of my cupcakes. And I'm like, it'll be fine. I know they don't look as pretty, but they'll be fine. And so I'm coming into work, because again, in our pretend world, we're in person. Coming into work, I've got 2 cupcake containers. They're all mixed up within the containers. And on my way in, I trip and I fall. And I drop one of the cupcakes of containers. I saved one of them, but the other one dropped. Now, the good news is none of the cupcakes got out of the ground. The bad news is the container went tumbling down the hill. Unfortunately, I only made just enough cupcakes that everybody could have one. I put a lot of work into those things. We're going to eat them anyway, right? And so I lay them out before you, and you can pick between 4 different cupcakes. You could have the cupcake that was in the container that rolled down the hill that I butter knifed iced. You could have the cupcake that rolled down the hill that was pretty with the piped swirled icing. Or you could have either of those 2 options in the container that didn't fall, right? The container that I was able to hold steady despite falling. Which cupcake are you going to pick?
The pretty one that didn't go down the hill.
Right, you're going to pick one of the ones that didn't go down the hill. And in fact, if you have to pick one of the ones that went down the hill, maybe you're the last person to select, you maybe just are going to be like, no, thank you, lady, I don't want your cupcake, right? Those cupcakes all taste the same. If I were to blindfold you, I know that's creepy, right? Okay, but pretend it's not creepy. I were to blindfold you and give you the cupcakes to taste test, you couldn't tell them apart. They've got the exact same ingredients, but what's different is how they're presented. Presentation matters. And that same is true on your resume. The way that you present your information matters. It's going to make the difference between you getting the interview or you not getting the interview. And so today we're going to talk about kind of briefly, these are the things that go on your resume in general. And then we're going to dive in specifically into experiential learning. So let's get started. The purpose of your resume is to give the employer an idea of who you are and what you can do to meet the needs that that employer has. It also creates oftentimes the first impression that the employer is going to get of you. It might also be the last impression that an employer is getting of a candidate before they decide who they're going to hire. I've been on search committees before where we've had two really great candidates. Maybe one's experience was really great, but I didn't know how they were going to fit with the culture of my team. Where maybe the other candidate didn't have as great of experience, but they came in and they meshed really well with the team and really challenged them to think creatively in the interview. And I was like, oh, I really like this. And I can't decide, who do I hire? The person that needs more training or the person that's going to be a better fit for my team? I don't know. And so we've pulled out the resumes and we've looked at them line by line to compare the candidates to see where we're at. In that example, we find a mistake on someone's resume. Guess who's getting the job? The person without the mistake on their resume. And so it could be that last thing that they look at to decide who's getting the position. So when we think about a resume, every resume has some basic information: contact information, education, and experience. So these are things that everybody should plan to have on their resume. And so let's look at each of these. Again, not in depth. If you have in-depth questions, reach out to Career Services or check out our YouTube channel where you can find additional information. But let's look at these briefly after I tell you about the optional headings. So there are some other headings that you might have on your resume. And again, this varies based on your experience. Perhaps you've studied abroad, then you might create a study abroad exception, a study abroad section. Maybe you've got academic honors and you want to highlight those in a section, or maybe you volunteered a lot or you have military experience. These are all things that you could list on your resume as a main heading. And again, we'll talk about this throughout the presentation. So let's look first at those building blocks. So first is the contact information. So when you think about your contact information, you want to make sure that you include a way for the employer to reach out to you. I still enjoy a phone number because I like to call the candidates that I'm reaching out to. So I would encourage you to at least have your phone number and your email address so that they can reach out to you. You may also choose to list your address. And this is something that if you ask 12 people, 6 will tell you yes, 6 will tell you no. It's not required, but you certainly can. I personally like to at least list a city and a state if I am local to the place where I'm applying so that they know I'm a local candidate. That way, if they have restrictions about the number of candidates that they're able to bring in from a distance. Maybe they're paying for you to fly in to interview, and maybe they can only bring in 3 candidates to fly in. I want them to know you don't have to fly me in. I'm a local candidate for this particular position if I were applying for a local job. Make sure that you're consistent with abbreviations. If you list that you live in Highland Heights, comma, Kentucky, and you spell out Kentucky, everywhere else that you list Kentucky as a state, you want to spell it out. Or if you abbreviate it, capital K, capital Y, everywhere else that you abbreviate a state, you want to make sure that you list that abbreviation so that you're consistent. Also, make sure that your email is appropriate. You wouldn't imagine some of the emails that I've seen. Someone legit once gave me an email that I am candy for women. And I was like, that does not go on your resume, right? So make sure that it's appropriate. Also, think about what your email conveys about you. If your email address is mamabear05, I'm going to assume now that you're a mother that either has 5 cubs or that your cub is number 5 on a sports team. So now I've just told the employer that I'm a parent. Now I may be okay with that and want them to know that up front, or maybe that's something I don't want to share in my resume. And so just be mindful of what your email says. Similarly, if you have a date, if I had that I was Lisa McElfresh 2000, you might assume that I graduated high school in 2000 and then be able to guess how old I am. And so think about that. Also with your phone number, Think about if your voicemail is appropriate for an employer to hear. If it's not, make sure that you change that and that your mailbox is not full. When we think about education, you want to make sure that you're listing NKU, if you're a current NKU student, first, because that would be your most recent education. And on your resume within each section, we're listing things most recent to the oldest. You're going to list the name of the institution. You do attend Northern Kentucky University. There have been some unique things I've seen on resumes for NKU students, so make sure that you spell that out. The location, and we're located again in Highland Heights, Kentucky. The degree that you're getting, Bachelor of Arts, Bachelor of Science, Bachelor of Social Work, make sure that you know what that degree is. You are not getting a Bachelor of Marketing. That is not a thing. So you need to check if you're a marketing major, what is the degree that you are getting, and make sure that you're listing that right degree. Now, there are a few programs where you choose if you want a Bachelor of Arts or a Bachelor of Science. It's never a Bachelor of Arts and Sciences. And so if you have questions about that, you can look in My NKU to see that. You can look in the course catalog to see that, or you could talk to your academic advisor. You then want to list your graduation date. You don't have to list expected. You can just have the date that you know that you'll graduate. So if I know I'm going to graduate in May 2020, I could just list that because it's in the future. They'll know that it's expected. Make sure that you list your major and your minors, your GPA, if it's good. My general rule of thumb is a 3.5 or above, list it. A 3.0 to a 3.5, it's up to you. And below a 3.0, I personally wouldn't put it on my resume unless the employer says it has to be there in the application. In this section, you might choose to list your study abroad or your honors if that's something that you're interested in putting or showcasing in this section. You might also choose to list your related coursework. And so this is something that you could do. Now you see here it says see the example in the guide, and Hannah's going to post in the chat for us a link to our resume guide and career services. And we give you examples in the end of that of various resumes that you could format your resume after. And so that's something that you may want to look at, and you'll see that we list in that how you can list your related courses. And so this is a really nice way to showcase to an employer some of the classes that you've taken, especially if you've taken classes outside of your major that relate to the job that you're applying for. So here's an example of a student's education. Notice they've listed the school, the city and state. The degree they're getting is not a Bachelor of Sociology, but a Bachelor of Science in Sociology. They've got the date they're graduating, and then they told us what track they're a part of, their minor, and their GPA. And so again, you may choose to format this slightly different, and that's okay, but this is just giving you one example. So let's look at experiences. So when we think about your experience, you want to list the name and the location of the employer. Now, this is the company name and the city and state where that's worked. And you could be listing a paid or an unpaid experience. It doesn't matter. Experience could be both. So don't be like, oh, I can't list that. It was unpaid. You could still list that in your experience section. You're going to list your job title and the dates that you worked within that particular position. And then you're going to give a description of what you did in that role, focusing on your responsibilities, your accomplishments, and your skills. Again, every section is listed in reverse chronological order. So most recent to the oldest. So when you think about your experience, here's an example of someone's experience. They worked as a sales associate at Dillard's in Crestview Hills. Notice that they bullet pointed their experience. And so it has each of the things that they did. It starts with a verb. It's in past tense because they're no longer doing that job. If they were still working at Dillard's, then it would be present tense, assist, prepare, train. Notice they also gave us some numbers. So they said, I supervised 3 stock clerks instead of just saying that they supervised stock clerks. So again, this is just a quick example to show you what an experience would look like. Again, remember to use bullet points. If you use a paragraph, it's really hard for an employer to try to sift through and pick out the important things, where when you bullet point things, you're labeling it so that they can easily see what they need to see to look at your information and to skim it to get the correct information. So before we hop into full-fledged experiential learning, I want to pause for a minute and see if anybody has any questions. Okay, awesome. Then I'm going to continue. You can at any time put a question in the chat if you have that hand. It's going to help us monitor that, or feel free to unmute yourself. But when we talk about experiential learning, which we've been celebrating all week, we're talking about activities where you learn through doing and then you reflect on that learning experience. So there are lots of different things that are experiential learning. So here are just a few of the examples of ways that you could do experiential learning during your time at NKU. Perhaps you do a co-op or internship, you participate in clinicals, or you do undergraduate research. Maybe you are student teaching or doing laboratory work, doing undergraduate research or field placement, practicum, student involvement. All of these things can be experiential learning. So the question becomes, how do I list these on my resume, right? That's what we came late for, Lisa, and you've taken 16 minutes to get to this point. I know, but I had to give you the basics. As a career professional, I couldn't not give you the basics of a resume. So let's jump in. So as you think about how to list your experiential learning on your resume, I would encourage you to start by reflecting on a few things. What was your role? Okay, what did you do in the position? What were the tasks that you completed? So what were the tangible tasks that you can say, yes, I did this, this, and this? What skills did I use or gain? Oh, I developed communication skills. And then think through, how did I develop those skills? How would I talk about those in an interview? How do I list those on my resume? What are the critical components that you need or want to highlight for future employers? Sometimes you do things that employers are like, I'm not familiar with that organization or with that group or with what you do. And so you might have to provide a little bit more context. And so think through, okay, what are the common known things that they would understand about this? Undergraduate research. A lot of people understand what that is if you just say you're an undergraduate researcher, right? But if you've done something else that maybe they're less familiar with, maybe you're an NLS scholar, then you might need to explain to them what that means and how you were selected to be an NLS scholar. I would encourage you to make a list of everything that you can put for each of your experiences. Now, we're not going to list that whole big long list on your resume, and I would do this for jobs that you've had, for organizations that you're a part of, for experiential learning that you've participated in. List everything. And then what you're going to do is you're going to tailor it for each particular job that you're applying for. Maybe you're applying for a job where it's really creative and you want to highlight the creative things. And so you're going to take off maybe the less administrative things that you were responsible for in maybe that internship that you did. But then for another job, maybe it's more administrative and you're going to take off some of the creative things to highlight the administrative side of that co-op or internship. And so by listing it all out, then you can pare it down for each particular job that you're applying for to customize your resume for those positions. So let's look at some examples. So here's a student who did an internship. They served as a public relations specialist for the Kenton County Extension Office. This student has chosen to create a section that's called internship experience. What I want to do is highlight for you that as the creator of your resume is yours, right? You choose what to do with it. Even when you send it to career services, I send you feedback back or another team member sends you feedback. We're giving you suggestions. Ultimately, this is your document that you decide what you want it to look like. So in this example, it's internship experience, but maybe this person wants to highlight the fact that it was public relations experience. And so maybe they, instead of calling it internship experience, call it public relations experience. I've had students before who have worked at a particular place and then they're applying for a job back at that place. And we've created a section in this case that would be like Kenton County Extension Office experience. I want that employer to immediately see, look, I've worked at this place before. And so again, you create the headings that make the most sense based on the skills that you want to highlight, the experiences that you want to highlight on your resume. So let's look at what this public relations specialist has done. So we notice really quickly, they list their title. So again, similar to experience, they list their title, where they've worked, the dates that they worked there. So this was a fall internship that they did. And then we can see what they were responsible for. Now, again, notice the bullet points are in past tense because they're no longer working in that position. And we see that they just don't say I designed flyers, but they try to give some additional information, design flyers and promotional materials for, so they tell us the event, and then using Canva. So they gave us the program that they used for that. They developed content for social media, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and increased the followers by an average of 10%. And so they gave us a number. So if you can give concrete numbers, percents, where you've accomplished something, number of people that you've trained, then that's going to help. Anytime you can quantify and give those numbers. Now, you may not have them, right? We don't always have that for our experiences, and that's okay. Do not make it up, okay? Always be truthful on your resume. But as much detail as you can provide is helpful to that employer. They talk about making a video and the program that they used to make the video. They talked about a newsletter article that they wrote. And so they highlighted a lot of the skills that they had in their public relations intern. Notice here, this person doesn't say improved written communication skills. Because what does that mean? How did you do that? Instead, they showed us, right? Wrote the monthly newsletter article. So that says to me, okay, that's using those written communication skills. So a lot of times when I look at students' resumes, they'll have a skills section, and a skills section is fine if you're listing your technical skills, maybe laboratory equipment that you use, particular computer programs that you're familiar with that are going to be helpful for this job, or maybe languages that you speak. But don't in your skills section list those soft skills like communication or teamwork. Instead, you want to demonstrate those things through the bullet points that you're writing in your experiences. So again, this was someone who had done an internship, and we looked at how that looked. You can think about whatever your experience is, how you might tailor that. And so we're going to look at a few together today. I'm not going to read you all of the bullet points. You have the ability to do that. But I do want to just look at a few examples. So here's a student who had done study abroad. And instead of listing this in education, they've chosen to make a section that's their study abroad experience. And then you can see that they had two experiences that they participated in. And so they listed what the experience was and where it was at, the date that they participated in that. And then again, they have those bullet points that showcase what they did in that role or in that position. Now, I do think this is a really interesting place to mention the fact that you do not have unlimited space on your resume. A resume is generally one page. However, there are a few what I like to call fluffy fields, like education, we're a fluffy field, right? And so I can have more than a one-page resume because education tends to be more accepting of that. But there are other fields who want you to stick to a one-page resume. And so that's where we would encourage you to know your field, know the market, talk to individuals who are in that field, come to our office and talk to us about what you're going into, because there are other areas that do not want a two-page resume. I worked with a student once and he had decided to go into an education route and he had this beautiful two-page resume. I mean, it was gorgeous. We had worked on it, made it beautiful. Then he fell in love, decided that education he wasn't going to make enough money in. Values changed, right? And his values changed. He wanted to go into corporate America. He sent that two-page resume to a recruiter who laughed at him. Luckily, she was a friend, and she wrote him back and was like, "I'll look at this once you make it one page. I want to see the skills and accomplishments highlighted quickly. I don't need some of the fluff that education is okay with, right?" And so that's where knowing your field is helpful. So I say that to say to you, when you think of your resume, for most of us, you have one page real estate for your resume. Just like if I had property and I have 1 acre of property, how much land can I build on? 1 acre. And if I fill my entire acre and then I'm like, oh, I want to put a doghouse on, what do I have to do? I have to take something off. So the same is true of your resume. You've got one page, maybe two, again, depending on the field that you're in, but probably one page. So you've got to decide what gets highlighted. And so for this student, if they were applying for a job, maybe abroad or maybe working with international students, or they wanted to show that diversity of thought, then they might list those bullet points. Or this person might take off all the bullet points and just list the experiences because maybe they don't have room and there are other things that are more relevant to the job they're applying for that they want to highlight. So let's continue. So we've looked at an internship, we've looked at study abroad. Here's a person who wanted to work in an international students and scholars office at another university. So this person wanted to highlight that they have experience internationally. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that they've been international. It's just saying this is my international experience. And so you can see there what they've listed. They've got their volunteer work that they're doing on campus at NKU. They've got their study abroad experience that they've listed that they did. And then they also participated in a mission trip at some point, and they wanted to highlight their mission trip. And so you can see there, again, for this person and the job they're applying for, these are the most relevant experiences. And so they want to make sure that they're listing the bullet points that they can for that information. Now, again, they may not have unlimited where they could list everything, but these are some of the highlights for that particular student that they wanted to show. I do want to note, because this is the example where we see that the person is still in their volunteer role. And so notice the bullet points are present tense, so assist, participate, where the things from their past experiences, study abroad and their mission trip, are in past tense. So that's something to think about. And remember, it's not an ing. They don't say assisting people or participating with. They are just participate and assist. So that's something else I wanted to point out on this particular slide. There is no limit to the number of headings that you can create. You create your own headings. Within each heading, things should be in date order. So notice that if this person was doing an international experience section, they've got their most recent to their oldest. And so that's just something else to note. So here's somebody who is doing student teaching. And you can see for their student teaching experience, they've listed their student teaching, they've listed where they did that, the grade that they were involved in, and then again provided us with some detailed bullet points about what they did as a student teacher and then what they did in their practicum experience. Now, this person has multiple other experiences, right? If you're in education, you know there's also practicum 1 and other rotations that you do, but this is just a highlight of what teaching experience can look like, which looks very similar to the others that we've seen. Here's a person who did clinical experience for a hospital. Now notice on this one, the person does not bullet point what they did in each of those units. Now this is something certainly you could choose to add bullet points if maybe you needed the space, but oftentimes when I'm working with my nursing students, they've also had some nursing experience in addition to their clinical experiences, and they're not going to have space necessarily to list everything and bullet points for all the areas. And so they've chosen just to list what they've done because this is something that a lot of students in nursing go through. And so most people understand when you say, I did a clinical rotation in the cardiovascular unit, what this means. And so it's not as necessary that you give them bullet points because it's pretty consistent with what you do in each of those clinical experiences. Also wanted to show you a research experience. And again, these can vary based on the type of research or the person that you're working with. But here's an example of a person who did undergraduate research for psychology. They listed the person that they were supervised by. And again, this would depend on the job you were applying for. If this were a person we're using this for graduate school, for example, it might be really useful to list the person that they had worked under. They told us the topic of that research, and then they gave us bullet points about what they had done. This is another place, again, depending on the type of research, where you might want to highlight specific skills or experiences that you've used. And so if you've used particular software that you know is going to be helpful in graduate school, you might want to list the name of that particular software. Or if you've used particular instruments, if you're in the scientific field, for example, you may want to actually list the types of microscopes that you've used to study those microorganisms, et cetera. Remember, as you're starting each of those bullet points, to use action verbs. And those action verbs should be varied. You don't just want to say each time achieved, or you don't want to just say achieved, 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 or responsible for, responsible for, responsible for. You want to vary them so that if the employer is just looking quickly, they see conceptualized, developed, recruited, completed, coded, presented. If they don't read anything else, if they just read those bullet points, even that, you get a pretty broad scope of what that person was involved in with their research experience. In the resume guide, again, that Hannah had posted in the chat, you can see additional information there that you can utilize for finding a good list of action verbs that might be useful for you. So as we think about experiences, the way that you list the material matters. So this is an example of a person who worked several years ago at an Olive Garden. And you can see the difference between the top bullet points and the bottom bullet points. The top one just says, took customer orders, delivered personalized customer service. And again, I'm truncating, I'm not reading all of that to you. Where the second one gives more details, delivered personalized customer service while taking detailed food and drink orders, built rapport with a diverse group of fellow employees, selected by management to serve as a corporate event in August 2014 and a key holder. I told you this was several years ago that they did this. Worked 35 hours a week while maintaining a full course load. And so this person provided more detail. Now, again, they maybe couldn't have used as many of those bullet points if they didn't have the space. So you've got to decide. But if this were the main experience that that person had had, then you would want to make sure that you're listing more more bullet points in that area. But even so, even if you were just talking about the top 2 bullet points, you can see how much better the second list is. And so again, the way you present the material matters. Let's look at an experience. So here's a person, and we can see from their resume, and it's hard on because it looks so weird on a PowerPoint, but we're going to pretend, right? So this is their section. They've created a section that is experience. They currently work at Applebee's, and we can see that that's a job that they have. And I see that they did not change their bullet points, which should be in the present tense. Then the person worked at the Historical Society as an intern and listed that information. And then they have their work at a law office that they did as an assistant. So let's imagine that this student wanted to apply for a position working in our anthropology museum on campus. So thinking about all the information that we've talked about today, if this is the student's experience, we can't really change their work experience, right? Because we might say, oh, well, you should have done this internship or you should have had this experience. But let's say this is all they've got. What would we recommend to this student to personalize their resume for that position in the anthropology museum?
They could, for their experience as the intern at the Historical Society, they can make that a separate category and maybe make Applebee's and the attorney at law like other experience.
Yeah, exactly. So this is where it comes in. Thank you, Hannah. So that's where it comes in that you can customize your headings so that things are showcased the way you want them to be, right? So right now, this person just has one heading, experience. But, and they did it right because they're in date order, so most recent to the oldest. But if they want to highlight the Historical Society, then they should create a new section. And so they could call that section several things. They could have called it internship experience, or in this case, they want to move the law experience there too, because it shows more related things than Applebee's does. So what they did in this example is they created a section that was related experience. They pulled those 2 related things or more related things into that area. And then they have a section that's other experience with Applebee's. Also notice when they did the other experience, they dropped off the bullet points for Applebee's because we want to leave Applebee's on there because it still shows that you've held a job for a really long time and you're consistent, right? So there are good things about that. But we want to highlight and show and use more space for the related experiences. And so we could use bullet points for them. So this is how you customize your resume, and it might look different for each job that you apply for because you want to showcase to the employer what you can do for them and the experiences that you've had related to the job that you're applying for. So a few content suggestions for you. Make sure that you edit carefully. To determine what to include, again, think about what's most related to the job that you're applying for and is going to showcase your skills and qualifications. Be consistent with your verbs and avoid using acronyms. On campus, I can tell you that I've got a meeting in the UC and then I'm going to run to the student union where I'm going to go to my NLS meeting before I pop over to the SGA office. You might or might not have just followed that, right? But we tend to use a lot of acronyms. Make sure that you're spelling those things out in your resume and in your cover letter so that your employers know what it is that you're talking about. For your layout, again, make sure that you're being consistent with your capitalization, your abbreviation, your bold facing, your indentation, and don't overuse those things, right? If you bold everything, nothing is bold. You also want to balance the material on the page. I like to think of it as if I'm holding a piece of paper on a scale, and if everything is on the left, then it's going to be heavy this way. And so I like to make sure that I'm pulling my dates to the right or that my bullet points are long enough that's going so there's material over on the right side of my page. You also want to make sure that you're formatting things in a pleasing way because again, presentation matters. Do not use a template. If we were in person, this is the part of the presentation where I'd have you raise your right hand and repeat after me. I will not use a template for my resume. Why do I tell you not to use a template? For a few different reasons. Number one, templates can be really hard to edit. Now, not to edit them initially to put your material in. But oftentimes when students have used a template and then they come and see our office or they meet with me personally, I say, well, you know what? You should create a related experience section. And they're like, oh, I don't know how to do that. The template doesn't have it. And I'm like, oh, okay, we need to start over, right? Like we need to create a new document. We need to take this out of the template. So go ahead and do yourself a favor. Don't be in a template. Another reason we don't want to use a template is that some employers use applicant tracking systems. And this is where you apply through an online system that first scans your resume. And then it decides, it serves as a gatekeeper to decide who passes on to the next step of the process. Applicant tracking systems can have a hard time reading templates. A lot of times they use charts and formatting that makes it difficult for those systems to read them. And so we would encourage you not to use a template for a second reason, not just it's hard to edit, because you don't want to be automatically disqualified for a position because the applicant tracking system cannot review your materials. You want to make sure you're using a traditional, easy to read font, that the size is no smaller than 10, right? I don't want to have to try to squint to read what you're saying. And that your margins shouldn't be too narrow, that you are leaving some white space. So 0 to 0 would not do, right? 0.5 is kind of the smallest that I would do, or narrow is the setting in Microsoft Word. It is critical. I'm gonna say it again. It is critical that your resume is error-free. Because again, this is the first and maybe last impression that an employer is getting of you. Career Services is here to help. You can email us your resume at resumehelp@nku.edu, and we are happy to look over it and give you feedback. We're emailing all feedback to students right now, and so it's a pretty easy process for you to get those documents reviewed by someone in our office. So I've done a lot of talking, and so I want to pause for a minute, find out what questions we have and what specific things I can answer for you today.
Hi, Lisa. This is Tori Vogelsang. How are you?
Good. How are you, Tori?
I'm good, thank you. I had a question about something like service learning. Where might you suggest including that on a resume if it's a significant service learning experience, especially with the new transcript designation?
Yeah, I think that is a great point. And I think you can list it multiple ways or places depending on what your career goals are and or what you gained from that. And the same is true of anything, right? And so if I were applying for nonprofit jobs, then I might create a section that's nonprofit experience and then highlight my service learning through that. I could create a service learning, volunteering, community involvement section, and I could list it in that area. I'd list it in a similar format to what we've been seeing in some of the others. But again, it just kind of depends on what it is that I want to work in. Also, if I did service learning for the place, then I might create an experience that's actually their name. So if I did service learning for Matthews 25 Ministries, then I might create Matthews 25 Ministry experience to put that in. In terms of where on the resume, again, it depends. Is this something that you're hoping to do as a vocation, then it would be higher on my resume. If it's something that I'm showing them, look, I've been involved in my community and look at this awesome experience that I've had, then maybe it falls after other things that are more related. But yeah, that's a great question.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any additional questions or thoughts from somebody else? I know there's several people who've created and done resumes in the past. And so if you have a tip or a thought that you'd like to share, I'd welcome you to do that as well. Awesome. Well, seeing that there are no questions at this point, I do again want to remind you to check out the Experiential Learning Week website, where you can find lots of great information about the programs and events that have happened this week. I want to thank Dr. Riley for organizing this wonderful opportunity for everyone to participate in and to really highlight the experiences that our students have had. Again, if you've not participated in anything, you are missing out, because there have been some amazing programs this week. And so I would encourage you to take advantage of those. Hannah and I will hang on the call a little bit longer. And so if you had a specific question that you didn't want to ask in front of the big group, Hannah and I are here to help Also, feel free to reach out to me via email. I'm always happy to help. I'll drop my email address in the chat. And so if you have a specific question, you can reach out to me even after the presentation, or you can reach out to our career services office. And we encourage all of you that are students or alum to get your resume reviewed at the resume help at nku.edu. Again, thank you for joining us and have a great finals week.